Because every time you buy something new, you create that product cycle. You contribute to it. So it's not just the making product part, it's where that material comes from and then what happens to it afterwards. That also needs to be considered in this whole life cycle.
Welcome back to the Sustainable Act, where we discuss all things environment, social impact, and culture. Today, I'm joined by the lovely Alisa Yao, who is a eco-product designer based in Vancouver, Canada. Alisa, thank you for joining me and being on the show today.
All right, thanks for having me.
And that's right? You're in Vancouver?
I'm in Coquitlam,
Coquitlam.
but a lot of people just to make it easier, no one knows what Coquitlam is, but people kind of know where Vancouver is.
Yeah.
And because the whole Metro Vancouver is like 21 municipalities, it's just most people I just tell like I'm Vancouver based.
Well, that's awesome. So tell me a little bit about yourself. So you're an eco-product designer, correct?
Yes. Well,
So
that's what I kind of go by. So
yeah.
what that means is that I focus a lot on coming up with products, not necessarily new products, like new concepts or ideas, but I create products that are more eco-friendly than other products on the market. So they function the same. The idea is that by introducing the environmental component into a product, I'm not sacrificing the function of it or the way it looks. So in the end, it functions the same way as what the product is supposed to replace.
Mm-hmm. And like, how long have you been doing this for? When did you start?
Well, I would say I kind of started dabbing at it when I was second year in my studies in product design.
Mm-hmm.
But when I graduated was when I actually like went full time and invested my time into it. But before that, it was sort of a part-time thing while I was still in school.
That's so awesome. It's so cool. So you were studying product design, and then it's so amazing that you created like a career in your own business from that. Like, what did you learn in school? Like, what was the course like in like product design? What was
Well, a lot of it was like I went into product design with the goal of one day being my own boss
Mm-hmm.
and understanding that if when I graduate or even before I graduate, I'd probably need to do some co-op jobs or work for someone else just so that I could get a better understanding of how the industry works, how to work with clients and things like that. And I think that's really essential to before you jump right in, do everything yourself. So I did do two co-op not placements through school, but I did do some work with local companies just so I can sort of see how a studio works
Mm-hmm.
and things like that before I really like delved into this full time. And with school, it was a really nice. I studied at Kwantlen. There's a Bachelor of Design program, and they have like multiple different programs, but I chose the product design program just because I felt like it had the most, I would say, more of freedom of expression in terms of the mediums that I get to work with.
Mm-hmm.
Compared to some of the other ones, I felt this one gave me more like freedom. So, for example, like graphic design, I felt it was very, very limited to digital or print.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't really allow me to work in the physical space, like physical realm. So that's just one example. Same with fashion. I felt like it was too restrained to just textiles and things you wear or things you like. And so with product design, it was just more about the focus was problem solving. And you're working with whatever medium, whatever material, whatever context the problem is in. And so right off the bat, the program was kind of built on this idea of open concept solutions.
Mm-hmm.
So you're given a problem by some of them were more for in class exercises, but a lot of the problems we worked on were actually from industry. So we got to work with real people in different industries who needed some sort of product developed to solve a problem they're having. And so we worked with things with wood, metal, plastic, foam, fabric, and we just had the opportunity to kind of work in all different aspects. And I think that by doing and making these things and testing it out, you can sort of revise and it gets better. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that was really ingrained into me very early on. So for me, even in my own business, I'm constantly improving my products and coming up with new innovative ways to be more sustainable in my business.
That's amazing. No, it's so cool hearing that because you're like when you're explaining that instead of being limited to like one aspect of design, you get to experience and learn about overall. And I can see that through the products I've looked at that you offer. It's very versatile, very different, and it's amazing that you can bring in different types of materials and create different kind of products. And so it's really cool that you knew that from the beginning. You're like, this is kind of this very smart of you as well to like
Yeah,
kind of
thanks.
have
So
that.
like we usually call ourselves like at least in product design we would call ourselves a jack of all trades,
Oh yeah, makes
but
sense.
it was kind of up to us if you wanted to like specialize
Mhm.
if in one aspect if because we were never forced to
Mhm.
like oh you have to be like this good at sewing or you have to be this. So it was kind of like yeah we learn all the basics of everything. We learn how to sew, we learn how to do some woodworking, we had a
Mhm.
shop, and then if you wanted to you could we also did some 3D modeling. But if you wanted to, we had after school like extra classes, like they're
Mhm.
free. You could just come and join where they taught you how to like laser cut stuff. You
Mm.
can learn a 3D print if you wanted to. And so for me, it was like, yes, of course I want to. Like I'm here to learn.
Yeah.
So for me, just being able to not be restrained by one medium
Right.
and just have, and also whenever something comes up and be like, okay, yeah, I can get that laser cut. That would be the easiest way to do it. Or I can just 3D print that. That's too complicated for me to try to carve with by my hands or something like that.
Yeah, no, I think I can relate with that because I went to film school and even my program was very much like that, where we learned every kind of aspect of film production instead of focusing on one, like directing or just writing. It's like that definitely has helped me, like when we learn the basics of everything. Like today I'm getting to host a podcast and I'm not super foreign to like the audio editing aspect because I had a little bit of training in
Oh
school,
yeah,
whereas like normally I'd be like a little intimidated because I've never, you have to learn from scratch. So yeah, that's
I
amazing.
think being able to go into a workplace or an environment where you're not sure what you're going to be working on,
Mhm.
having the ability to be flexible
Yeah.
and being able to quickly learn a new skill or be willing to adapt, I think that's like really useful on its own. Like not even if you didn't know what it was, but you if your mindset, you're willing to learn it.
Hmm. That's so it's really cool to hear that. And I'm very curious to know like your journey in sustainability. Like when did that start? When you did your interest in sustainability begin? Like because you incorporated that with your designs and like your job, but is that something you've always been like aware of, like going into university or?
Yes, for sure. So in I would say it started in high school, and of all things, in physics. So in high school, we did, there was a unit on environmental physics, and it was talking about like, at, I mean, at the time, I remember the one thing I remember the most was learning about reflectivity and emissivity. So you're looking at the ratio of like, of frozen, like of glaciers and like of ice
Mhm.
on the Earth versus ocean area, and looking at the like, if more ice melted, and so there was more ocean how that changed the temperature of the planet and things like that.
Mhm.
So, and it was like from a very physicsy perspective. So I was like, okay. And being at the time in high school, wanting to go into science and engineering, it was like, for me, it was all about like, it was to me, like environmentalism seemed like it was the logical thing to do. Because you're like, well, of course, we don't want the planet to get warmer. We don't want more weird weather all over the world that's gonna, devastate cities and people.
Mhm.
And so that's kind of when I was like, okay, with the plan of going either into science or going into engineering, and I didn't want to pursue um, something that would hopefully benefit mankind or like hopefully benefit the planet.
Mhm.
So I think that
Okay.
was when it like was the when I was first introduced to the concept of sustainability
Mm-hmm.
and like really understanding. Like it wasn't just like the basics like, oh, trees give up oxygen and like that was
Yeah.
taught really early on,
Yeah.
but I think it didn't really stick until I understood the science of it.
Mm-hmm. No, hats off to you for that, because I think like we all go through those science classes and we learn about this, but not
Yeah.
everyone really takes it in that form that like this is a real issue that we are living in today. Like this climate crisis and like the planet is heating up, and the ocean pollution and all the things that are happening right now, it's affecting us today, and it's going to be affecting our next few generations to come. And I think, I don't know from your experience, but from my experience, like science classes I've taken, we discussed it, but we never really emphasized climate crisis and like this kind of like these issues. It never came up in the classrooms where it's
I
like,
think also the curriculum has changed a lot since then. Like I
mm-hmm,
graduated high school 2010,
mm-hmm,
so that was like a good 10 years ago. And at that time, I think environmental and stuff like that weren't emphasized as much,
mm-hmm.
but it was taught, it just wasn't emphasized. And I think I would assume now it's a lot more like ingrained in the program or starting at a much earlier age.
Yeah, well, let's hope so. I mean, like I didn't learn much, and I graduated in 2016, and currently my sister's in school, and I think it's starting to, though, now that people are recognizing this as an issue, and it really comes to like who's in these positions of power that are building the curriculum and teaching in the classrooms to really enforce and like lead these discussions. So it's really cool because you know when you hear somebody's story of like how they started like their journey in being more sustainable, sometimes it's just like this one thing that you learned that has opened your eyes, and you can't look back, and you can't go back to like your normal way of living, because that's all you see. And so it's so cool and so amazing that you took your passion for caring about the planet and integrated that with your career, and knowing that you wanted to do something better for the planet. It's like super inspiring. So like that's amazing. And I would ask, like, what kind of products do you design then?
Well, it's funny because what I mainly sell online and at craft markets, even though they're closed right now, but currently I mainly sell eco products for home use.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, products that I constantly carry are my beeswax food wraps, my beeswax snack bags, the lunch bags, which I think are sold out right now, but they're like snack bags, just bigger.
Mm-hmm.
And I also do yoga bolsters,
Mm-hmm.
which are also sold out right now, but I will be making more soon. And so these are just kind of a couple of the products I'm just kind of constantly making. But aside from that, I do a lot of custom orders on the side as well.
Amazing. And you said you have a home studio, so you do it all from home, or?
I do all from home.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of nice. I like it's funny because with when COVID hit and everyone's working from home and a lot of people are talking about like, oh, no, the isolation, the and I think some people are talking about like the mental health aspect of working from home alone. I'm like, I've been doing it for a few years.
Yeah.
It's just
So
that
is it
this
much
is just
different?
no, it's not, well, the only difference for me is that my husband's here.
Yeah. You
So
get more
I have
quality time.
so now for me it's like, oh, now I have less space for myself
Yeah.
because the this room that where I used to just kind of like do yoga and stretching is now his office.
Mm-hmm.
So he's in this other room right now.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, definitely like COVID, it has brought its challenges, but it's cool seeing how people are adjusting and making it work, and like,
Well, it'd be definitely interesting to see how many people that used to go in like to the office to work
yeah,
realize that, they're just as productive at home, right?
yeah,
Now you get to subtract that awful morning commute
yeah.
and the commute back in rush hour,
You save all
right?
that
And
fuel.
maybe get to sleep in a little more.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to see when that happens. Like my husband's company told him he's working from home to the end of the year.
Okay. No, you know what? That is a really good point you brought up, because it is like now that we are going, a lot of companies and work are going more remote, because like you can't come into the workplace, but you do need to keep working because things need to be running.
Yep.
And then people are realizing like, hey, yeah, we don't need to be paying for like the heat and electricity and the internet, this office space. And then, that's just for the business side. But then like a personal, like you're commuting, you're using up fossil fuels, you're spending all this extra time. Whereas like if you can get the same amount of things done, like obviously this differs company to company, but I think a lot
Yeah,
of
for
people that
sure.
can make do with remote work and that is so much better for our environment, where it's like one hand, there are a lot more single-use items being used because of the pandemic, and just like for your protection, and but on the other hand we could be saving and kind of balancing like the waste that
No,
we're
for sure. I think with environmentalism, I think it's never like an all or nothing,
yeah.
right? You have to always compromise.
Mm.
And one of the things I want people to realize is that it's about learning to compromise.
Yeah.
And when COVID hit, like for example, in our case, we're buying a lot more frozen food,
Mm.
bigger packages of food. So there is definitely more packaging waste, but it means that we are going out grocery shopping less.
Mm-hmm.
So for us, it was like, well, should we risk going to grocery store multiple times a week to buy like unpackaged produce or fresh produce that just won't last as long
Mm-hmm.
versus buying, a big bag of frozen something and
Mm-hmm.
just putting it in the freezer and then that will last much longer.
I like that, like how you said about compromising. I think, especially we're in like right now, with the whole plastic-free July movement, it's so cool and inspiring. It changed because you're now people are starting to reflect on how much plastic they're consuming. But the goal of it isn't. I think a lot of people get intimidated because going plastic-free is like impossible. And I
Oh
think the
yeah,
real
I
point is,
agree with that for sure. There's a
yeah,
lot of because plastic is like to me, plastic is just one of many materials. There's lots of different
yeah,
plastics, each has its own applications. You
mm-hmm,
just have to find the right use for
yeah,
plastic. So for example, like all my Tupperware is plastic. I
mm-hmm,
don't use glass Tupperware because it's really heavy. I don't
mm-hmm,
use stainless steel very much just because it's not microwavable.
mm-hmm,
So in terms of Tupperware, plastic is my go-to
mm-hmm,
just because of that. But I know, like I've heard stories of people that just want to like go zero waste, so they throw out all their plastic things and then they buy glass. I'm like, well, you just threw away all the stuff that's completely like it's
usable.
like completely usable in perfectly good condition that could have
Mm-hmm.
just been used many more times until they finally break. Then you can
Yeah.
consider replacing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's kind of one of the key things about at least the zero waste movement that I think people get wrong is
Yeah.
that zero waste doesn't mean like we're anti-plastic. There's
Yeah.
certain applications for plastic that's very good. Like
Mm-hmm.
single-use bags, I'm very iffy about that.
Mm-hmm.
But there are, for example, like when you throw out garbage in my building, you have to bag it. You
Mm-hmm.
can't just throw loose garbage in the bin because when the truck comes and dumps it,
Yeah.
the wind just like blows it everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So like it's mandatory that you bag your plastic. So when we do get plastic grocery bags, because they won't let us use our own, or we forget it sometimes, it happens. We just like, well, like we don't, I don't fret about it. It's like, okay, this is one plastic bag. I'll find a use for it somewhere else.
Yeah. No, and that coming back to like compromising, that's again another key thing that, to assure people that like the goal isn't to go completely zero waste because that's impossible, but also like do your part where you can and then, try to make it work. But there are going to be some compromises you're going to have to make. But yeah, let's talk about materials, because you told me in school when you were studying this, you were working with all these different kind of materials, and I'm sure you are right now too when designing products. What like how much waste is created by this design industry, where you're, like you said, you have textiles, lumber, like all these different kind of materials. Like normally how much waste is created when in
Oh,
production of these?
I have no idea. I know that depending on the type of production, obviously, some materials can be reused, some cannot. So, for example, if you're plastic injection molding,
Mm-hmm.
right, where you're taking little tiny nurdles of plastic, melting it down, and pushing it into a mold, there's essentially very, very little waste. And that plastic can then be put back into the hopper and then like extra little bits can be reused. So
Mm-hmm.
surprisingly, like plastic production is very waste free, like the production part of it.
Mm-hmm.
So compared to, for example, making clothing, right? You have this big sheet of fabric and you have like a pattern that needs to be cut out. Depending on how you lay the pattern, you can minimize because no, like very few pieces of clothing just made of squares,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's always going to be some fabric offcuts. So depending how you position the pieces, depending how they pattern draft, like I don't do any of these things, but I know this is kind of how things are made in the
Mm-hmm.
textile industry, is that you have a big sheet of paper and sorry, fabric with templates and you cut. So, and depending on the fiber content, if it's 100% cotton, it can go to somewhere that can hopefully compost it or reuse the fibers. Or if it's 100% synthetic, then it can hopefully be the fibers can be melted down and remade into fibers. But if the material is like a weird blend of something or it's like two different materials on together, like that stuff just usually ends up in the trash.
Mm-hmm. So, like, would you say, I know you said it differs like material to material, but like, would you say overall it's this industry is wasteful or not? Like, is there
Um,
issues there, or are
well,
people
I
trying to
think
change?
that so, but I wouldn't call product design like its own industry. There's like a huge product
Right.
like circle of life for the
Mm-hmm.
product, right?
Yeah.
So if your product requires minerals or things to be extracted, for
Mm-hmm.
example, like let's say wood, right? It needs to be trees need to be cut down for wood. That's where wood comes from. In a certain extent, I think at least trees are renewable. But if you're extracting minerals and things like that, those aren't always renewable unless it's something that's like has a high recycling rate, like aluminum, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to kind of take into account that aspect of design as well as like
Right.
what material did why did you choose this material for this product?
Mm-hmm.
Does the material's lifespan, let's say wood, obviously doesn't last as long as metal. So let's say so for example, phone cases and phones, do they need to be made out of metal versus because you're really only using it for maybe a few years. People replace phones so fast nowadays. Does it make more sense to make phone cases out of wood?
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of like I think what needs to be thought about in product design
Mm-hmm.
is that aspect. It's like, well, phones cases that are made of metal, let's say, and the metal can be recycled. Is it easy to disassemble?
Mm-hmm.
Because if it's like metal and some other weird thing attached, you can't disassemble it. It's hard to recycle it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like at the other end when the product like life cycle is ending, is how to deal with that.
Right.
So it's not just the making product part, it's where that material comes from and then what happens to it afterwards. That also needs to be considered in
Yeah.
this whole life cycle.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So like really looking into the life cycle of the items that you use and buy and like do you find that like if someone were to like want to find out like what this life cycle may be, because I know like a lot of like clothing stores don't exactly reveal exactly where their clothing like the textiles are sourced from, or it's a lot of like things that are just kind of below the
I would,
surface. Like,
yeah, for sure. And I don't blame them. It's just a lot of at least bigger stores like H&M and other
mm-hmm,
fast fashion, right? They contract some company out in Bangladesh,
mm-hmm,
and then they are the ones that source the material, and then sometimes they even subcontract to somebody else.
mm-hmm.
So it's like you ask the company where's the material come from, who made it, and then they're like, I don't know, someone
Yeah.
like it says made in Bangladesh somewhere in there,
Yeah. So
right?
it's definitely.
And then the other thing I've noticed is when brands do scale up to that point where you're contracting over like overseas, offshore manufacturing, and then they change manufacturers, and then sizing goes completely wonky, materials go weird. Like I've had that issue with a pair of shoes.
Mm-hmm.
I need it replaced. So I got the exact same size. It was like a whole size smaller.
Mm-hmm.
And you're just like, what happened? And you look at the label, one was made in India, one was made in China. So at some point they change factories and then the
Yeah.
quality is just not the same.
Right. No, for sure. And so it's a good thing to think about too. Is like when someone is purchasing items or like whatever the item is like see if you can look into the life cycle of like where did this the materials get sourced from, and then current use of it, and then what are you doing after it. And also like I think it's so important. This is something I'm still learning, is that even sometimes when I recycle something, I don't know if is it actually getting sent to like a recycling depot and actually be like recycled or not, right? Because sometimes it's taken away and then you don't know what happens with
Yeah.
it. And I think that is another thing that I want to do more research on, so that we could have that transparency here in the communities, where are the things we are recycling actually getting recycled, and what is happening to those items, or are they just ending up in landfill and we're just living in this illusion? Because I know like even with like plastic bottles and things, only like I think 30%, I think that's a fact, 30% of the bottles we recycle actually get recycled, and the rest
Oh
end
yeah.
up in the
Well,
dump.
it's funny because it doesn't actually get recycled, it gets downcycled.
Yeah, with plastic
So
bottles.
so plastic bottles don't become new plastic bottles. Plastic
Yeah,
bottles become polyester because
yeah.
PET is polyester,
Mm-hmm.
right? So when a company says, "Oh, we have leggings made from plastic bottles,"
Mm-hmm.
or "We have this is made from recycled bottles," it's like it's not made from recycled bottles, it's made from downcycled bottles. Had the
Yeah,
original person not recycled the bottle and just kept using it as a
yeah,
plastic bottle for water, like you can just refill it, it's a bottle,
yeah.
it would actually be better for the environment
Mm-hmm.
than if it were broken down, because breaking down into little bits of plastic,
Mm-hmm.
remelting it, making into sheets of fabric, cutting it, making it into clothes,
Yeah,
that requires energy too,
a lot of
right?
energy, fuel, water,
Fuel, transportation, for sure.
chemicals.
Chemicals, yes. So there's then it becomes a pair of leggings, let's say, made from
Yeah.
recycled bottles. Some I know brands advertise that kind of stuff,
Mhm.
and then people buy it and they feel good about it. It's like, from
Mhm.
my perspective, it's like these are kind of marketing gimmicks
Yeah.
for to kind of greenwash products,
Mhm.
so they're not actually green,
Yeah.
because they're not actually green. But leggings made from recycled bottles is better than leggings made from virgin plastic. So
Uh-huh.
there is kind of like there's that difference.
Right.
For example, you have leggings made out of new materials versus leggings made from recycled or repurposed materials. And then, on the other very end, if you want to be completely zero waste, you could either not buy the leggings, repair
Mhm.
your existing leggings, or you would thrift.
Yeah, by secondhand. No, for sure. And this comes back to like the life cycle and really looking into that, like before you go purchase. Because I think the number one thing that you can do to help is just divert waste. So,
Yep,
like you said, like don't buy it or buy secondhand, so that you extend the life of a product rather
of
than
course.
trying to buy something new.
Because every time you buy something new, you have to, like, I think most people don't think about it, but when you buy something new, you create that product cycle. You
Yeah.
contribute to it, right? If
Mm-hmm.
people stop buying new or buying certain products, companies wouldn't make them.
Mm-hmm. Can we talk about a little bit about greenwashing, because you brought that term up, and I've heard this around a bit too, and it's something that I'm kind of, because I took marketing classes, and greenwashing is like legitimately a thing that people
Yep.
do, brands and businesses market, because like you said, when some businesses will market like the leggings being made from recycle or like plastic bottles, it's like I guess they use this kind of simple terms to like attract a certain type of people that be like, okay, well, I'm helping the environment, rather than like going into details, because that could get a little complicated. But what are your thoughts on like what is greenwashing for those that don't know?
Okay. So greenwashing is when a brand, it's a marketing strategy used by companies or brands to emphasize or sell a product based on, I would say, half truth
Mm-hmm.
statements about the sustainability of the product. I don't know if I worded that well,
So
but
using like the environment sustainability movement as
yeah,
like a
using
marketing strategy.
keywords, using like certain words, buzzwords
Mm-hmm.
to kind of grab your attention to give you the assumption that this product is a green product or an eco product, but when in reality the product itself actually is not eco.
Mm-hmm.
So one example of this would be, stores that would sell you eco mesh bags. that's one of the products that really bug me is that these mesh bags are made of plastic. So you're putting food into a plastic bag that is reusable. Great. That part's good. But then plastic is not made from recycled plastic. So it is made from new plastic. And every time you wash this bag, it just sheds microfibers into the water stream. So if they really wanted to create an eco produce bag, it would be like a cotton.
Mm-hmm. And so going into like the materials, what kind of materials do you use like to design your products?
So for me, a big emphasis for me is, like I said in the very beginning, to not limit myself to just certain materials.
Yeah.
But what I currently focus on is primarily textiles,
Mm-hmm.
and I use unwanted textiles from other people.
And so like yeah, because I remember reading that on your Instagram, like like you use not recycled but
I use unwanted.
unwanted materials. So
Yeah,
it's like still diverting waste from going to the landfill, which is
yeah.
amazing, giving it another life. Where do you source these like materials from, these
Okay,
textiles?
yeah, a bunch of different places. So in terms of textile recycling,
Mm-hmm.
there is FabCycle, and also in this Metro Vancouver area, there's FabCycle, and there's Our Social Fabric.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the two places where they actually get like dead stock fabric, roll ends, and other unwanted stuff from the fashion and film industry
Mm-hmm.
in Metro Vancouver, because there's a lot of costumes and stuff being made. And
Mm-hmm.
what end up happening is you, in order to get certain fabrics in, you can't just order a meter or two. You got to buy a whole bolt.
Right.
And then for a certain film or whatever, they only really need a few meters.
Mm-hmm.
And then the rest of the bolt is just not useful for them anymore. And so in the past, I would assume before these organizations stepped in, these fabrics would just kind of go in the landfill,
Tossed out, yeah.
tossed out somewhere, out of sight, out of mind, you know?
Yeah. And
And
still
then
is
so,
to this.
well, to this day still, I know some people still do that, but when these organizations stepped in, they would come in and pick up this fabric free of charge, because I think a lot of there's a barrier there for smaller studios and companies, because getting someone to pick up like a bin of textiles can be really expensive.
Mm-hmm.
So these organizations come in, I believe, pick it up for free, and then they clean it, sort it, and then they sell it back to small makers and just home sewers, hobby sewers.
Mm-hmm.
And so from my perspective as a small business and I'm like a maker, I prefer to shop there knowing that it's ethically sourced and like diverting from the landfill, and also that I'm supporting what they do so they can keep doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think so those are the two organizations that I like get a lot of stuff from. And when COVID kicked in, they're now both doing online and with shipping. So it's really great in Canada wide, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other place I go to is actually surprising, fabric stores. So fabric stores, when they order fabric in, sometimes there's misprints and other problems with the fabric. So they can't actually sell it, and it just sits somewhere, or they have to discount it. So sometimes I get fabric with like completely missing streaks of dye. I have fabrics with like blotches of like discoloration, or sometimes fabric is like, oh, there was excess dye. I'm like, well, I'll just wash it. But in those cases, like they're selling it at cost,
Right.
right? So I'm like, I'll just buy it all. So you can get this kind of stuff at fabric stores too. You just have
Mm-hmm.
to ask. They usually don't have it on the floor
Right.
because that's not something they want to sell because it's imperfect fabric.
Mm-hmm.
But but in my case, like, for example, like food wraps, people are just, wrapping their food with it. It's okay if the fabric doesn't look as pretty.
Yeah.
And it's funny because those are actually my better selling wraps.
Yeah.
I
Because
market them
then,
as well. The thing is, I market them as ugly wraps. I kind of put them
oh.
together into a little grab bag.
Mm-hmm.
So then the customers, like, it's kind of like a mystery pack. You don't know
Yeah.
what you're gonna get. But I tell them like, oh yeah, in this bag you're gonna get like a small, medium, and large. They're all just imperfect fabric, but they work
Right.
exactly the same. And then people go, oh great, I'll take that one. And I sell it
Yeah.
at a discount too, just so it encourages more people to kind of rethink,
Mm-hmm.
like, if this product if it's much more function based, does it really need to look perfect?
Also, like I like the unique side of like the product too. Like it's more unique when it's not like perfect, and I like it because that's like what people find when they go thrifting. They find more unique items. So like anyone that's listening that is in like costume or fashion industry or whatever, that's getting rid of clothing, because I know like even to this day people are still throwing things out in the landfill. Like I work in the film industry and I hear that, oh, like sometimes they didn't do their research and finding these organizations to donate their materials to, so like they just end up taking it to the landfill. You're paying a fee to take it to the landfill anyways. It's like if you had done just the research ahead of time, you can be now using these, like giving these items a longer life. And for those that are looking to source secondhand, strongly encourage you to also check out some of these places to
Yeah,
get cost like fabric and costumes and or whatever you need it for. So that's
yeah,
amazing. Like thank you
for
for
sure.
oh,
Yeah, and then the final way I get textiles in is through just donations from individuals as well as other vendors. So like because I do a lot of craft markets, I bump into a lot of other vendors and we
mm-hmm,
talk about what I do. And usually I'm just like, yeah, if you like, if you sew or you have a lot of little scraps,
mm-hmm,
then I can use it. Like some scraps, like depending on the person, some people think like a piece this big is like a scrap. I'm like, I
mm-hmm.
can use that for fruit wrap.
Yeah.
If you're okay with it, I'll take it. I'll make something with it. And sometimes like some plate people give me really tiny little bits of fabric scraps and I'm like, great, those would be stuffing for my yoga posters.
Nice.
So because usually what happens is these smaller makers, they're also in the same situation as me. When you're working in a small room at home, you don't have like a big bin to throw your scraps in, and you don't
Mm-hmm,
want to pay a company to come and haul it away.
mm-hmm,
So usually what they do is they have a little bin. Whenever it gets full, you put in a bag and you throw in the trash.
mm-hmm,
Just because you're working with mixed fibers, some blends, and there's no proper way to recycle it.
mm-hmm.
So a lot of it just ends up in little bags in the trash. So sometimes, so what I've done is at craft markets where, because the vendors, we kind of know each other's, when we'll be at the same market, which is they'll just reach out and be like, oh, I have a bag for you. I'm like, perfect. I'm at whatever booth. So I get lots of little bags of textile scraps from fellow vendors and artisans as well.
That's amazing. That's also like another great way to like just be more eco-friendly, is like sourcing it from people and like
Well, it's also, I think it's also helps to get other people involved,
yeah,
right? So that way they kind of also divert their waste.
yeah.
Because I think anybody that makes stuff, I feel like the I concept of like, oh, this stuff that's left over, what do I do with it, should be on the back of everyone's mind.
Yeah.
So what I've done is at the beginning when I make a product, I kind of already think about what I'll plan to do at the end.
That's so great.
So then you kind of think about it and you're like, well, is this product something that I want to like sometimes with like custom products actually.
Mhm.
Um, I think about it, okay, well, is this something I want to make long term? And just kind of make it as like a standard product versus just kind of a one off.
Mhm.
That's kind of how I evaluate it. It's like how long it took me to make, but then how much like scrap fabrics I got out of it. And
Mhm.
then whether or not that's to me is a good value for this product.
That's like really, really good for you to like, be thinking that. I think something that we need to encourage more people is to think that way. It's like to think about what's going to happen to that product at the end of your use before you even get it. Like,
Yeah, for sure.
for any,
That's actually something I have on all my instructions.
uh-huh.
Is like, oh, this is how you like take care of it, and this is what you do at the end of life.
That's so great. That's so awesome because yeah, like thinking back to like the industry I work in and even other people's industries like that you work in, your professional place and at home, like when you are sourcing items, a lot of times people aren't thinking about the end. And that is why they end up at that place where they're like, oh, we didn't have time to research. And so off to the landfill it goes. So super cool. Like, and that is like, that's another good piece of advice to pass on is, think about the end before you purchase it. And like
Oh yeah, for sure.
when you think about it, it's like everything that we're using, like to produce materials, even recycling and doing, it's all using up like energy and water and releasing chemicals into our air that we are inhaling. And the water we are drinking has this like, are now starting to have this like microscopic, like tiny particles of plastic in it because of the massive amount of pollution into our oceans and landfill. And people need to realize, like, the key is to divert waste, not recycle. Like, recycling isn't the
Isn't the
solution.
solution. No,
Yeah.
it's part way
Yeah.
there, but it's incomplete
Mm-hmm.
because recycling eventually leads to downcycling
Mm-hmm.
unless you can um, like have the product remain in its original properties.
Yeah.
So in terms of recycling aluminum cans,
Mm-hmm.
they become aluminum cans. That's
Yeah.
great. I think, like, for example, that in that case it's great, but plastic, for example, there's too many types of plastic.
Mm-hmm.
So a plastic bottle doesn't become a new plastic bottle, and that's the problem.
Yeah.
So if you can create a system where plastic bottles and only like these plastic bottles are being recycled, then maybe you'll stay 100% PET. But otherwise, where plastic gets mixed in, and then the quality just goes down from bottles
Yeah.
to pants to yoga pants, and then eventually to, I don't know, kids' toys. So the quality just kind of goes down
And like
over time.
keeping in mind that, like, even if those product that like could be the cycle, but it's like less and less of each thing gets recycled. So like 30% of the bottles that we recycle get recycled and made into those, like, let's say yoga pants, and then maybe from there it's like 10% of like the fabric or that
Oh
is
yeah.
recycled. And it's like, at the end of the day, it is just not worth it. It's like, it's not helping. It's like, just divert waste by going with the reusable items that you can.
And also to take into account sometimes recycling, that like to the chemicals and the
Yeah.
process and the power required can actually be more detrimental than extracting the resources from scratch,
Yeah. And
right?
I
So
think
that's
that's,
why, yeah, so that's why there's certain things that technically could be recycled in quotations, but companies don't want to recycle it because they don't make money.
yeah.
So like, for example, I think it was coffee cups. There was a group, I forgot what it was called. It was the Binners Project in Vancouver. It might have been them or a different group, where they found a contractor that would take the coffee cups at 5 cents each
Mm-hmm.
because no one else would.
Mm-hmm.
And then they had a bunch of these people collect coffee cups to bring in, and I think they did like 50,000 coffee cups one day, just because somebody was willing to pay 5 cents
Mm-hmm.
for the cups. Otherwise, it would just get tossed into some garbage bin on the side of the street.
Yeah. No, even I know that, like, with soft plastics or plastic bags or things like styrofoam, things that normally like won't be recycled under curbside recycling pickup, but if you go and take it to a depot or a place that can collect those at a fee, you can get those recycled. But yeah, then it's just like that kind of cost. It, I think it depends on like the person, right? Some like
Oh yeah, for sure.
yeah, some people don't mind doing that, knowing that it's going, like, it's, they're doing their part. It's like, at least it's not going into landfill per se. But there's are people that are like, oh, it's not worth it. Like, I don't want to pay
It's
for
not
it.
worth the time.
Okay,
It's not worth the time of going to the depot just to recycle a few foam trays.
yeah.
So then what ends up happening, like in my case, is we just wait until there's enough
Yeah.
so that like we do like maybe like a yearly trip
Mm-hmm.
of foam trays and other things that needs to
Mm-hmm.
be recycled. So usually
Mm-hmm.
some small electronics and things like that. But on the other hand, you expect also people to have space to
Yeah.
store all this stuff. If they live in a small condo, they share a living space. I don't think it's realistic to expect people to have like 10 different bins of things
Mm-hmm.
and then waiting for them to all be full enough to take it to a depot. Because I think to a certain extent, for example, like people who might be more prone to eco anxiety might be more like have a harder time balancing like that compromise. So like, for example, sometimes it's just like I have this one thing I really want to recycle, but I can't cycle it.
Mm-hmm.
Do I just hold on to it until I can?
Mm-hmm.
whenever that is, or do I just put it in the trash
Mm-hmm.
if it's a small piece? So for example, like that's something like I've thought about when I first started was,
Mm-hmm.
oh, do I go full out zero waste and take my jar to a zero waste store and get like a toothpaste refilled versus, okay, well, I got toothpaste at home. It comes in a tube. Like I have lots of those little tiny ones you get from the dentist. Like I still got toothpaste at home,
Mm-hmm.
but then every time like once I finish using one, I got this tube that I gotta throw out. Do I want to do that, or do I want to, go buy the sustainable one in a jar that can be refilled? And then I kind of like as I think about these little problems, because if you think about it, toothpaste is,
Mm-hmm.
not that big. You look at other, like I see these big problems where, people are knocking down a building and the whole thing is just going to landfill,
Yeah.
right? That's, you know, thousands of tons of material just versus, should I throw this tube out? Should I recycle it? I
Right.
think you kind of, from my perspective, I think I have to kind of pick my battles.
Yeah.
Like there's too many things to worry about in the world, and if I worry about every single one, I think I'd go crazy.
Yeah, definitely. No, like what you said in the beginning, like you have to compromise, and like what you said now, pick your battles. I think that's like something that I think people just need to hear sometimes, just for reassurance that like you're doing the best you can. Pick your battles, and like you can't go perfect, and the goal isn't to go
Oh,
perfect.
yep. The goal is to gradually improve,
Yeah,
right? So like when something breaks, yes, you can replace it with something that's more sustainable and
exactly.
hopefully last longer than the last one so that you're
Yeah.
not constantly replacing it. And I think going with that approach was kind of how I ended up reducing at least like the amount of garbage I'm taking out. Like
Hmm.
when I first started, I was like, okay, what am I actually throwing out in the garbage? Kind of like doing like a little mini audit at home. Like looking at your garbage, you're just like,
Hmm.
well, I threw this out because I was lazy and I didn't want to recycle it. So this could be recycled. I just didn't feel like it.
Hmm.
Versus sometimes we're just like, well, this was just like excessive packaging product I could buy a similar one with less packaging. So it's
Hmm.
kind of making those small changes here and there. And then so I've gone from I think about like a bag of garbage every 2 weeks. Like I live in a household with just me and my husband.
Hmm.
So when we first started, it was a bag every 2 weeks. Now it's like a bag every 3 or 4 months.
Oh wow,
So
amazing.
it's like you're throwing out like, a few bags of garbage a year
Hmm.
compared to, there's 12 months a year to like every month
20.
you're throwing out two, right? So you're 24 bags versus 4 bags.
Right.
So you're kind of seeing, wow, that's a huge decrease
Hmm.
in the environmental footprint just by making these gradual baby steps.
Hmm.
I'm not zero bags, but I think doing something is better than doing nothing.
Yeah,
And
100%. Like,
I mean, that was like what, just like almost 4 years of gradual, like
yeah.
small things, small changes here and there. And sometimes you're just like, well, you see a product you really want, you're just like, well, there's so much packaging. Do I really need it, or do I actually just want it?
Right.
So now I just kind of like, before I buy a product, I think about it. Like, if I buy this product, what does it mean? How many years do I plan to use it? What happens to it afterwards? Where is it made and how it's made? And I go, no, I don't want that one.
Hmm.
I'll buy this other one instead.
I love that. That's just such a good takeaway. And also, like, if you can't, like, if you're going to go buy something, see if the brand that you're buying from is transparent with those details, because that also goes to show a lot too. When people are like, if there's companies or brands or businesses that are very secretive, that also says a lot too about like what are you doing? Because that's like you said in the beginning, you become part of the life cycle and part of the problem when you contribute by purchasing it, and
Exactly.
yeah, that's amazing. So, how can people find you and purchase your products?
Okay, so depending on the product, I sell it through different channels.
Okay.
So for my standard products, which is the beeswax wraps, the snack bags, and the lunch bags, and I currently also have drawstring bags with windows. Those are available on my Etsy store. So the link for that would be www.alisayao.etsy.com. So it would
Okay.
be ALISAYAO. That's my name. So alisayao.etsy.com. That's for my standard like zero waste products for food storage.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of where I sell those on Etsy specifically. Well, until craft markets are back up, that's kind of where I'm selling. So currently doing Canada-wide free shipping.
Mm-hmm.
For my yoga bolsters, I do because of the amount of time it takes to do each one, and not just they take up so much space. And they're really heavy, so I can't really ship them. Those are only available locally. I do pre-orders for them just because fabric availability. I also sell them through Zero Waste Refill Store in New West,
Okay.
called the Refill Stop. For my food wraps and other like products, food wraps and bags, couple of stores in Metro Vancouver may still have some in stock. So I do stock the soap dispensary. BC Buzz Honey's Honey Hut in Langley has it. That's where I get my beeswax from. They have a little like shed, like little cabin, log cabin sort of thing on their property where they sell their honey and other products, but they also sell products made from their products.
Mm-hmm.
So they have honey soap, they have my food wraps, and they have a lot of like other things that are honey and bee related. Also, the crafted shop in the Calgary Farmers Market. So for people in Calgary, they also carry my food wraps in my bags. Usually, when I do restocks, which isn't super often right now, I'll be posting it up on my Instagram, which is at AYMYAO.
Okay, amazing. That's really good to know. So if you're in the area, if you're local, in Vancouver, all around like the Fraser Valley as well as Calgary, you can go in store and get some of these products. You may call ahead to make sure they have it in
Yeah,
stock.
definitely call ahead to make sure, just because right now, like I don't get inventory updates
Mm,
from many of these places, so I don't know who has how much in stock. Usually I just get an email when they run out, say I need more.
right.
Definitely call ahead and ask. And I mean, if they don't have my products, they may have another brand
Right.
of similar products.
Well, I want to end this off with the rapid fire questionnaire. So,
Okay.
I'm familiar with this segment. It's basically I ask 5 questions. You just answer in 1 to 5 words, the first thing that comes to mind. So, you don't have to overthink it. There's no right or wrong answer. It's just whatever comes to mind and just have fun with it. No pressure. Number 1 is if you had to describe yourself in 1 word only, what would that be?
One word only. I would say ambitious.
I love that. 2 is if you could be any animal, what would it be and why?
Oh, any animal. Turtle?
Turtle?
Just because I think it's associated with like it's the story of like the tortoise and the hare, like
Yeah.
slow and steady wins the race.
Yeah.
I kind of want to kind of have that mindset, you know, just kind of take each day at a time, not stress over every stuff, and not just try to get everything done in one go and get burnt out. And just having that balance is just kind of consistently doing that for a long time versus go, 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 and
And then
then
crash.
you crash. Yeah.
I love that. No, that's something that like my mom always reminds me of. It's like, slow and steady wins the race. Take your time working towards your goals. That's really good. I love that. Okay, the next one is best place you've ever visited and why?
Best place I ever visited. I mean, I don't really travel that much, but I did go to Portland last, like just kind of the last week of June last year, not
Mm,
this year. And I think it was really nice because for me, at least travel wise, it's not about like I when I go travel, I go for the experience. So the food, I went there for the craft beer. It is called Beervana.
mhm.
So the food, the beer, we hung out with locals. We stayed at a hostel and really go there for the touristy like things. I went for these cool events that were just happening at the time.
Right. Yeah, no, that's awesome. Okay. So next one is how do you practice self-care?
For me, I think it took a while to kind of understand, but it's like the signals your body gives you. So for me, it's like understanding hunger cues. Having been in university for like 8 years is I feel like it really messed up my sleep cycle, my eating habits, and things like this because you're just waking up early, staying up late, and then you're constantly stressed, and so you're just kind of like
Working
you're
and
like, well, the thing is, and I was working part time, so it's like
Mhm.
you're just juggling too many things, and then because you're so low on energy, you just eat snacks, eat whatever is available. So I just had a really bad habit of
Mhm.
like eating unhealthy foods at weird times of the day.
Mhm.
So kind of going back into like a normal schedule. Like it took a while for my body to be like, wake up. I'm not hungry right now. I'm not gonna eat. So it's kind of like understanding, and I'd be like, oh, what are signs when I'm stressed? Because a lot of times it's just like I'm hungry, but is it because I'm actually hungry, or is it just because I didn't get enough sleep?
Yeah, no, I relate to that so much. During my time in university, it was the same. I was so unhealthy. I was always stressed. Yeah, you're right. We're balancing so much. Like university students are not given enough credit for like, you're not only like going to class and lectures, you're also doing all the homework and assignments, especially being in like a field like we both are where it's very hands-on. So you're working on projects and things and outside of school, but then you have to like pay the bills, so then you work a job and then like oftentimes your self-care and priority to take care of yourself is neglected or pushed to the
Oh
back.
yeah. Well, the things you have all these other important things you got to deal with
Yeah,
first. So you're like, oh
no,
well,
definitely.
it's like I don't have time to cook big fancy meal, so I guess I'll just some microwave thing.
Yeah,
And
no,
then over time that adds up, right?
and it affects your mental health so much. And you're right, like you now are starting to like recognize your like where that anxiety stems from or how to handle it, right? And so I think that's something I also can connect with. Is now I'm starting to understand myself more, and if I'm feeling some sort of way, I'm like, okay, let me just pinpoint to why I'm feeling
Yeah.
and how can I resolve this. Whereas before I was too tired and too stressed to ever like think of myself. So no, that's a really good thing. Okay, last question is, if you could change one thing in the entire world, what would that be?
I think I would probably put in place some sort of a policy or regulation that companies or products or brands or whatever um, need to have an exit plan before they are in production. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that was one of the things, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, probably not, but before I studied product design, I was actually in engineering for
Mm-hmm.
2.5 years. And of all the things, because I was interested in environmentalism, I went into mining and mineral processing because I feel like that was where, of a lot of industries, that was actually one of the greener ones because of all these problems they've had, like, from decades of bad press and stuff like that. So now, if you want to open a mine or you want to start even like consider mine planning, you need to have a reclamation plan. Like that's like one of the first things you
Mm-hmm.
need to have in place before you start like digging or anything. So I think that's really important, like that an industry like mining can get that going. Other industries can't. So I think if I could change one thing, it would be policies where companies or brands were liable for are required to have an exit plan strategy for their products or be liable for what happens to the product afterwards. Rather than kind of what we're doing right now, it's kind of like band-aiding it as we
Yeah,
go,
yeah.
like with the extended producer, like the EPR.
Mm-hmm.
So when you recycle your phone, take it to e-cycling or whatever, the cost of recycling and whatever is being funded by like the companies that made these phones. So that's why now if you take your old iPhone, let's say, to the Apple store, they have to take it back. But that was only because laws were put in place. Because I don't like if there wasn't, why would they take it back? It costs them money to recycle it, right?
Yeah.
So I think that needs to be in place for all industries. If a company that built this building is required to deal with it when it comes down, then they probably would have built it differently,
Absolutely. No, that's a really good
right?
point. Yeah. I think more people, like whoever's listening, and there's a way that you can implement this into your strategy, your business, your work, like definitely, we definitely encourage you to do so, because you're right. Like think about the exit strategy in the process, like the beginning, before starting the process of anything you're doing. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lisa, for chatting with me and like sharing
Yeah,
your
it was
wisdom,
a great
because
chat.
This has been very like eye-opening for me because I'm like, knowing more about like the product design background in terms of like the different materials used, and like talking a little bit about, the life cycle and recycling, and how the inspiration behind your product. So it's so cool learning about that. I encourage everybody to follow Alisa and her work, support her on social media, buy her products on Etsy, or go to those markets or shops.
For the last few months, I've been just primarily making masks and PPE just because I have the skills and the materials to do so.
Yes, so yeah, like definitely everybody support Alisa. That's amazing. I definitely am gonna contact you right after we end our discussion because I need a mask. And also remember to follow The Sustainable Act on Instagram and Twitter at The Sustainable Act, and subscribe to the podcast. And I will see you next time. Thank you for listening.